I have to say there was a moment when we were talking about doing this shot that I didn't know if we were going to achieve it. And the original challenge, when I told Ben about this idea, he was like, the only way I'm going to let you do this is if you do it practically. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Lee Gagné, and I am the cinematographer and director of episode 7 for the TV show Severance. Welcome to the process.
Miss Cobell's orders. I'm to watch her for signs of sadness and verbally encourage her to forego further suicide.
Today I'm joined with one of my favorite operators, Scott Maguire. Hi.
Hey.
So today we're going to break down some crazy stuff we've done together this season. Scott and I have been working together for years now. He actually showed up on season 1, but became a bigger part of the team on season 2. Were you green camera or blue camera or innie or outie? I don't know what we were anymore.
It was back and forth. And I started as a day player on season 1 and it sort of clicked and did a bunch of work there. And then season 2 was there the whole season. And we had blue and green camera. Then it was innie and outie camera. And then we just it's part of the way that Jessica likes to work, which is really great, is especially with a show like Severance, which is so complicated and has so many moving pieces all the time, is that whoever is there and it makes sense for them to do the shot, they do the shot, and somebody can go explore something else or take care of a different duty or whatever. So it's nice to have really good qualified interchangeable people, and that helps.
Yeah, I don't like to consider the cameras as A and B or C. It can be kind of annoying sometimes for the camera crew because they have to wrap their heads around how we label these cameras. I feel like it kind of creates a system of equality. I don't think that there's like a hierarchy in terms of operators. To me, it's whoever's best fit for each individual job. And season 2, we had a lot of really technical, crazy things to do that needed a lot of research. And Scott, I don't know how you felt when I started really like kind of taking you aside and explaining some of these more complicated shots and kind of putting you on all of these homework assignments. Because like episode 7 specifically had a lot of challenges. Like, how did that make you feel that I kept putting you on like homework duty?
I love it. I love it because it's outside of the normal routine of everything we do. And to get to explore things and think about things for longer than just creating a setup on the morning of and troubleshooting and seeing something through from beginning to its fruition. It's a unique challenge and I actually really enjoy it a lot. So some of the wonders we've done and some of these shots that are super technical where, you have to think about how you're going to achieve something and, run it through the drawing board instead of just coming up with it and executing it immediately. It's like a little different than what we do every day. And I really like it, actually.
Well, good. I felt bad sometimes because I feel like there's kind of this isolation thing that happens. A lot of operators love to be on set and be that camera that's covering everything live with all the actors. But to make these kinds of shots, you really need to like spend a lot of time at the drawing board and test things and try things. So today we want to talk about one of the shots in 7 that was, to me, one of the hardest shots I've ever done as a cinematographer. And I think that, even as a director going through it, the fact that I DP and direct on this episode was really helpful because I was able to kind of like push the language even further. But without you kind of taking the time to work on it, we would have never been able to achieve this because, I don't know, it took months to get to really like figure it all out. So we're talking about this oneer that starts with Miss Casey and Mark in MDR. That's actually a season 1 clip that pulls into this cable run and brings us to the viewing room. So the first part you weren't actually operating on it. It was done with a bolt arm. And I
Yeah.
worked with Dan Gottsman from Garage. And we did this kind of like organic, swervy move that left from Mark and Miss Casey and landed onto the ground. So that was shot with this 10 mil ultra prime lens. But then when we get to the rest of it, I don't even know where to start to talk about this. I wonder, like, do you remember our first conversations about it?
It's actually really interesting in the way that season 2 went. I don't, everybody should remember that there were strikes that sort of disrupted work in the US. And so we were shooting season 2. I think we started in October, and in April or May, we had gotten shut down for the writer's strike, and we didn't come back till January the next year. So we'll call it the second half of season 2, I guess. We started in Kaufman Astoria's studio. We had built the birthing cabin there. And the very first day we were back from the strikes, Jessica approached me because she had been thinking about these transitions that she wanted to do for her episode, and they were all really interesting. So she was like, okay, I have some challenges. Here's some stuff I'm going to throw at you. And there were a couple shots we discussed, and one of them was this one. How do we get a camera to come through these cables and do it real and have it be in there and go through this very long distance, this very long run inside a nest of cables? We started thinking about it and talking about it. And I was like, well, we have to get a probe lens, and we have to get some kind of collar that would gather the cables as we were pulling back, that would allow enough room for the camera to get through.
We had storyboards to talk through this. So when I was talking about this with you, there was like visual material that
Yeah.
was showing you visually the desired intention. And we're trying to combine MDR, which is above the viewing room. And we're trying to show that we're basically going from these two characters in MDR down inside the middle column of the desk, through the cables and out to the viewing room.
Right. And it should feel like traveling through, 10 or 15 feet of cables from one floor where MDR is to the floor below, which is the viewing room where people are watching them. So this is a camera traveling through, space that a camera couldn't normally travel through.
I want to take a second, to talk about what happened that day at Kaufman. I know I was on set shooting episode 9 and 10 work, and I kind of left you in a corner at Kaufman with the center column of, I believe you had the center, like the actual center column of the desk.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember if we had it the first day or it appeared like within a couple days. But there was sort of like an empty spot away from where the birthing cabin was, with room to work, and it started getting populated by stuff from the art department. Originally, we were thinking, because it wanted to be a long move, that it would be a horizontal move. And ultimately, gravity wasn't really a fan of that, so it became a vertical move, which is what it is in real life. But we started experimenting with some other stuff.
Yeah, I have a drawing here that John from Set Dressing gave to me, I believe, after having conversations with you, which basically is the idea for this rig. So in here, right, is this where the desk, the center part of the desk was in here, and then basically we were going to pull through with the probe lens, pull back, and this all became like this on stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
This. I don't know if you want to talk us through this a little bit, but
like, and
works and all of that with the cables. I'm curious to talk about that.
And considering that was a day one sketch, that's like super close to what we ended up doing. Was Doug Coleman from special effects built a bunch of stuff, and the art department was great with this shot. They really accomplished a lot of things that we needed them to do. And so all these practical cables, which ended up being fiber optic cables that some light could get sent through.
I have to say, like, there was no way to light this shot. People ask, well, how are you going to see anything? You can't light inside the cables, because we wanted the lens to move through the cables. So I was like, well, let's just get some fiber optic cables. We'll light with those. And with Kurt Lenning, our gaffer, we came up with like a clever system. So it's all self-lit with these cables.
And when they were super bright, it looked like a crazy spaceship, right? Like, it ended up looking really great like this. Like, there's barely enough light to see what you're doing going through, this practical space, which was really cool.
So the camera's booming down, and as it's booming down, so we're going through the center column of the MDR desk. We had an extra one, and we had to be really like savvy in terms of saving costs for this shot. First of all, we wanted to, shoot all the elements in camera, which is what made it so challenging, but we couldn't, build another desk. So we were trying to work with materials that were not too expensive. And since episode 4, we built an extra desk to go out and shoot in the dream sequence with Irving. We had that center column. And there's a little fun fact is that in season 1, in the scene that we use in season 1, Irving takes his divider down and up, and the pulley, if you look at inside the shot as we're moving through the desk column, you'll see the pulley mechanism move. So it's meant to be kind of like timed with that. So as we're pulling down through the desk, the cables, you see that move, and then you get through inside the cables. And how did you make the cables close onto the lens? Because like you can see them close onto it.
So I think it ended up being basically 2 columns that the cables fed through. And, a probe lens is probably about, that big around. So the cables had to be able to sort of gather in front of it by spinning them as the camera was coming down. So there was a series of 2 columns. One of them was built in to risers on the dolly. So it would travel with the camera as the camera went up and down. The other one, I can't remember if we attached it to the probe lens or somewhere else on the camera, but they would spin and bring the cables together to like eliminate the gap as the lens was coming through. So basically the lens would reveal that it just came from somewhere that didn't exist when it passed through, which is, it sounds kind of strange. I hope I'm giving it justice and describing it.
It's really hard to describe this shot, and it also explains why it took us so much time of just even looking at the materials we were working with to even figure it out. There were days of just coming in 15 minutes before call where we would gather art department, gripping department, lighting department, camera department, and we would and special effects department, which actually had a huge role to play on this. And we would just talk through where we were at, what we needed to do. And and we would schedule, okay, well, we're going to need some time for Scott to be taken off of another scene so that he can work on this. And okay, today we have the collar built by Doug's team. They would put it in and you would be able to test the second part. And it's important to mention that this shot, basically, if you take it all the way to the moment of the feet, where we get up to the feet of the watcher and then we boom up into the desk, it's 4 pieces. So you have the bolt arm piece, which goes to the ground, showing us the widest possible view on the ceiling. That's the first piece. And then we have the inside of the column, which takes us to where I believe where the cables start to close. You go from column to the cables closing.
So that second piece started inside. There's like a metal cage, which is the framework on the inside of the desk. And so we started basically with the lens, which was an Optex Excellence probe lens we ended up using. I think it was the longest one, just the shape and the way you rigged it up with motors and stuff worked the best for us. So we basically got that lens, and if the cage is like here, the lens was sticking just out there. So, and as it was stitched together, that would be seeing the ceiling of MDR. And then it pulled back through the hard cage, got through about that far, and then the cables would start winding around it. So that was section 2.
Section 3 is just inside cables.
Just inside cables, yeah.
There's this one piece where you're going through and Doug and his team are twisting the cables, right? So that they're staying close to the lens.
So we're on a hybrid dolly with a mini lever remote head and this Optex Excellence lens, and we're booming down and the cables are tightening around us. And then we get to a point, we're also on track. We get to a point where we come down and we pull out of this sort of like hole that we had made. And we start the camera lens, which feels like the camera at that point, starts, instead of being vertical, it starts to become horizontal. And we're dollying back to allow the lens to like stay very close to the cables as we're coming down. And it looks like the camera has gone from looking straight up to now looking horizontal. It's like a 90-degree shift.
And that takes us to the last stitch. So now that, we're no longer looking up and we are now looking straightforward horizontal, you connect to the viewing room, which the viewing room, you had to work a lot with the art department in terms of like creating, because we had to come out of this column. So first of all, how do you come out of a column? So you're starting in this matching set of cables, right, that they built within the actual column. You're going down and then you're going to slide across. But do you want to talk a little bit about like how this center column had to be modified?
Yeah,
To
because not only are we going straight down and then across, but we actually turn around and look right back at the column that we had just come out of. So again, this was another thing that was like, it was amazing to have a really good art department. It was amazing to be able to steal a little time here and there. And tests we would do, we wouldn't even have necessarily the final equipment. So for instance, like we shot it on a Libra head, but when we tested it, we were on like a modified Lambda head, just super rigged out to balance like these crazy off-centered things to be able to test it. And part of what feels intimate about this shot is that the lens is right up against the cable. So it's a very wide lens and it's right up against the cables, which then doesn't leave a lot of room for the camera to come out of this column. So the column had sliding pieces on it. We figured out exactly what pieces couldn't be there as we passed through and had to be there when we turned back looking that way. And the art department drew up schematics and they built it and executed it great. And there was somebody standing behind the column with a pulley that engaged that piece as we were coming, traveling laterally to get to the feet. And it was in place by the time we came to the front of the feet and saw that column again.
There's a tiny bit of CG work that is to, mention, like the grate that you see when we pass through that grate, like was completed in post. I feel like we should have just done it for real, but it didn't feel necessary. And then there's cleanup, on the full column piece and all of that because we didn't have the entire column. Oh, you were using a prism. We have to specify that because originally that last part of the shot, like my original idea was to build a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids set.
That's right.
So we would
That's
talk
right.
about that as like a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I
Right.
wanted everything to feel huge, but that had an insane cost to it. So this was like our poor man's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids set.
And I remember shooting it and you were pleasantly surprised at how big the feet looked, and that was part of using this periscope and this very wide lens is like you're up against those feet and they feel gigantic. It feels Honey, I Shrunk the Kids,
I think there's an interesting thing about the parallel of Lumon being this like big overwatching force, and it's like shows us how like small we actually are in this world. The fourth part of the shot, then we boom up into the desk and we're out into a whole other thing. But I have to say there was a moment when we were talking about doing this shot that I didn't know if we were going to achieve it. And the original challenge, when I told Ben about this idea, he was like, the only way I'm going to let you do this is if you do it practically. Obviously,
Right.
there's stitching and cleanup and stuff like that. But like,
Yeah.
I'm really proud of like the work that we put in. And it was one of the things on the show where it really became like a symphony and orchestra of the departments working together.
It was really cool, especially for that second half of season 2 to be able to steal 15 minutes there, 45 minutes there, not have everything in place, but have enough to learn what you needed to do as like, the timer was ticking down because we started thinking about this shot in January. And I think we shot it the last week that we were in the studio. Like we left the studio for the very last week of the season, but up until that, it was like, okay, is it ready? Maybe.
Yeah.
It's close, and it was just, yeah. And getting those finishing details and achieving it and everybody being happy was super satisfying, and it was like, it's like watching a good game that comes down to the wire.
Like, I want to thank you and like Cameron and Frank also, who worked so closely with you on this, the first and second AC. You guys, I really put you in situations where you were stuck in this green room sometimes for days just trying to figure it out, and you were so patient. But like the meticulous qualities that you have were so important in episode 7 and were really key. You were also the one spearheading all these time lapses.
Yeah, those were fun too. And everything was different. I loved the episode. I loved watching it and I loved being a part of it and working on it. And like, it's been really special.
Can I ask you a little question before we end this? I want to know for you, I don't think I've ever asked you this, but what was the difference with working with me you worked with me as a DP for years, technically.
Yeah.
It takes. But what was the difference between me as a director and a DP in terms of our relationship?
Ooh, I think you had more freedom, right? As a director and a DP, obviously, you're following a singular vision rather than a plural vision, and so that gives you a little more freedom to know exactly what you're going for, right? And so then I think probably step up into a role that's working closer with you, because then it's a chemistry between the two of us rather than a chemistry between a director and you and myself. So
Yeah,
I would say that it probably changes that way. Like it becomes a little more direct and a little more intimate.
that's cool. I feel like that seven kind of needed that. Well,
It's a
Scott, thanks
terrific
so much.
episode.
Thank you. Well, I feel like everyone really came together on it. It's a special one, and it's a
Yeah.
special season. But thanks, Scott, for joining today.
Thanks for having me on the process.
Yeah, we'll see you on the next project.
Sounds good.